everybody, and welcome again to another edition of the Modern Farming Podcast, where we are cultivating agricultural excellence through education.
We are your hosts, Chris and Tara, and together we are growing knowledge about the world that feeds us. And today we have Brad Turner back with us again, and he is with Sand to Soil Services. Welcome back, Brad.
Hey, y'all. Hey, everybody. This will be fun. Today we're going to start digging into some specifics on certain things. But if you caught the last one, or if you didn't, you can go back and find it. We just started digging into this whole concept of soil health and healthy plants and plant nutrition is not just one thing. It's all these different things. And today we're going to pick one of them out of the pot and dig into it for a few minutes. And today's going to be cover crops. That's the one we chose to dig into first. But in the original episode, we talked about cover crops and compost and mulch, inoculants and biostimulants, and the balancing of minerals and testing. So there's a lot of different parts to the puzzle. So today we're going to dig into cover crops, which is my favorite and dearest to my heart. So this should be a good show.
I think so. That sounds great, Brad. So to start off, could you let the audience know, for those that aren't real familiar with cover crops, what exactly is cover crop? What does that mean? And why are we doing it? Why do you recommend to do it? And why is it part of your overall plan?
Yeah, just basically cover crops is just, it's planting a crop that's not necessarily for harvest. So it's there to perform a task or a job. So the main goal is just to keep the soil covered, keep something growing in the soil at all times. There's nothing worse on soil and soil health than just having fallow, barren ground. So, I mean, we were kind of taught, I was taught in college, if we do have them in with our perennial crops or our farm crops, they were robbing nutrients and robbing water. And that's not necessarily the case. They're just a beneficial crop that you're not harvesting to sell. It's there to help heal your soil and make your soil better.
So what kind of plants are you using for this cover crop? Is there a certain kind that you usually use?
Yeah, there's a lot of most cover cropping in the past and even today is done in a monoculture. Typically, they're just planting rye or just planting clover or just planting one. But what we've learned, what science is learning, is that the diversity in the crop makes a lot of difference. So not just having 3 or 4 different species or just anything different is waking up different biology. It's different root structure. So, and we'll dig into the importance of why that is. But yeah, it's there are specific ones that perform specific tasks at certain times, and so there's some science to it, but a lot of it is getting a lot of diversity in a planting.
So Brad, are you planting crops, cover crops, say when there's no other, let's call it production growth happening, or are you doing it simultaneously, or is it, obviously with a garden, you're probably doing it when there's nothing growing, but like for trees and groves and orchards, are you planting cover crops along with the trees? Is that the idea there?
Yeah, and that's the easiest one and the fun one, because integrating diverse or any kind of cover crop in a perennial or a permanent type planting, especially if it's a sizable crop like a tree crop, it's kind of easy to do that because you don't, when you've got cover crops taller than your lettuce and cabbage and tomatoes, that's kind of hard to manage. It's not really done that way. So in vegetable crops, and they've done this for centuries, in your fallow season in Florida, it's typically in the summer. When you don't have a cash crop in, you would plant a cover crop, and we're seeing more and more of that, a lot more of that now, just in the last 5 to 10 years that we used to see at all. So it's still mostly monoculture because most of the farming community really doesn't have the grasp of the importance of the diversity. And a lot of that is just the way we're taught, because there's certain cover crops that may help promote a certain nematode that we don't like. So that gets studied. But what doesn't get studied is if you have a diversity of a bunch of different cover crops, and now all this new biology is formed, everything's getting more complex, then these pest problems typically don't rear their ugly heads and give us problems, because the good guys are helping to take care of the bad guys and we hadn't even dug into the biological side, but that's kind of why we've just stuck with single species in cover cropping in the past. But the science is really starting to understand the benefit of just diversity in general.
So I know that, one of the things that I hear have heard, it's pretty mainstream, simple gardening, is you find things that they call nitrogen fixers, right? So that's where I was kind of introduced to that kind of methodology. Is you put something like, typically they're legumes like peas and beans or whatever, that you put in your garden in the off season to get nitrogen back in the soil. Is that?
Yeah.
That's kind of how I think of it. Is so you're doing this on a more scientific level, more exact level than just a nitrogen fixer. Is that right?
Yeah, and it is hard to study once you start changing all these different parameters. But yeah, when you talk to somebody that knows a little bit of something about cover crops, it usually goes to a legume, because a lot of farmers understand if they're planting cowbell peas or winter peas in the winter, or sun hemp. I mean, there's a lot of nitrogen fixers that do. They'll take, the atmosphere is 70% nitrogen gas, so it takes that, and the rhizobia bacteria converts that into nitrogen, and you can measure it. You can knock that off your fertilizer bill. If you can measure so many units of protein of nitrogen that you've got through your cover crops, you can, if you need 200 pounds, and you can measure that to 50 pounds, and you may only have to put out 150 pounds of nitrogen. The goal in the soil health or regenerative world, or whatever you want to call it, is to get all your nitrogen that way. And it can be done. It just, all of this soil health is just not something that happens overnight. So it takes time to do these things. But yes, and typically when I'm putting a blend together for somebody, I'm looking for diversity. Like I would try to get in one form of a grass, like a ryegrass, and a form of a cereal. That's diversity. So like an oats or a rye, then some broadleaf, something like a sunflower, which is real good at fixing zinc up, and they can put roots down 6 feet deep. So zinc phosphorus has been leached out of the system, essentially, we thought, because it got past our crop roots. Cover crops with deep roots like that can mine it up, bring it back, and it gets recycled for a later crop. So, and then you have brassicas, which is all your mustards and turnips and greens and those kind of things. And so you try to get at least one of those 3 or 4 families, and then that gives you some diversity that is then giving you all different architecture in the root system. But the coolest thing, and what I really started digging to 9 years ago when I first got into this, is just the diversity of the biology that wakes up. So every plant is trying to summon a specific form of, whether it's a fungal, bacteria, protist, archaea, whatever. It's trying to summon a specific microbe to perform a specific task for it. And so if you get more of that going on, you're waking up different microbial communities, and then you start getting microbial diversity, and then that's when soil health really starts happening, in a nutshell.
So does it only happen while the crop is growing, or is it because you till it back in, or you put it back into the dirt? I mean, that is the procedure from what I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's all, through history, they were planting cover crops, and we would cultivate them in, and then the biology would break them down, and that was carbon, that was food, that was building organic matter. So it's just come to light in the last 2 or 3 decades of this no-till farming, and this is not in perennial cropping, and now I'm talking about actual farming. And they do a lot of this, not a lot, but there's a percentage of farmers, and there's some in Florida that do no-till. So they're growing diverse cover crops in their system all the time. And so they are either, some of them herbicide them out, which isn't great, but some of them do, and they can do some good things. Some of them are terminating them by crimping them down and then planting right into the thatch. So that thatch is laying down, and then that's covering the soil. The biology will come up and start breaking that down, and then they plant their corn, wheat, and soy right in just what looks like a mat of grass or weeds out there. So there's a lot of that going on. And then in perennial systems, where I'm a citrus guy, that's where we've just in my lifetime, in from 50 years ago when I was started in citrus, where we kind of cover crop naturally. I think my great grandfather actually did some cover cropping a long time ago, but we just kind of let the covers naturally grow up. There's natural legumes, beggarweed, the one that gets all over your britches when you walk through a pasture, the little half moon looking things. That's a nitrogen fixer. They used to plant that 100 years ago. So we just, in the last 50 to 80 years, we started more herbiciding, planting trees closer together. So we just kind of got away from this having other living plants in our growing system. And it's caused some issues, in my opinion, in today's agriculture, especially in citrus.
So is there an added benefit to cover cropping where I believe there's things that aren't good to be growing under your trees or under your large vegetables? So are you also managing, bad vegetation by continuing to cover crop under things? I'm thinking of the invasive Kogan grass and things that can't super good for your trees, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, in nature, you'll never see a monoculture. You can go anywhere on this planet and you will never see one thing growing in a place naturally. That's because it's not healthy. It's not natural. So whenever we try to do that, nature is trying to build soil back, and so that's why what we call weeds pop up. And there's different reasons that weeds come up. I mean, it can be as simple as we've done things to the soil with excessive tillage or herbicide or chemistry or whatever. I'm not saying that that's necessarily bad, but we've changed. There's a lot of chemistries that tie up nutrition. When we disc heavily, when we cultivate heavily, we kind of know it. That helps us lose our organic matter. And if you dig into what organic matter is, I mean, that's the home for biology. So when we do that, we're kind of causing these issues. So when we do that, there are plants that we call weeds that either with the nutrition that's not there, they can flourish. So they don't need a lot of calcium where other crops need calcium. So this is the plant that pops up because the calcium's not available. I'm just using calcium as an example. Mm-hmm. Or it's a plant like, say, a dandelion in your yard that is good at mining calcium. And that's why they're probably there in a yard, because the calcium's not available. So they're going down 3-4 feet deep and bringing up calcium. And there's allelopathic. I mean, plants can emit a chemical that can actually kill another plant. So there's a lot of plays in that, but the thing, you're always going to see diversity. If you have a diesel spill on a farm, it might take 5 or 10 years, but something's going to start growing there again. And it's usually something you don't want. It's just something's going to grow in the crack of your driveway. Something's going to grow in every place there's a piece of soil if it can happen.
So also, from what I understand, there's a temperature thing, right? Which really makes sense in Florida. So you've got stuff covering your bare ground or your dirt, your soil. That naturally keeps the temperature down, right? And the moisture, it helps retain some moisture when you've got that cover. It's not just wide open.
Yeah, and that's pretty. I mean, you can just go out and feel that, but yeah, if you have a cover crop growing and that area is shaded for the most part, like today, it's 80 something degrees and the sun's shining. You could go out with just a meat thermometer, or a air conditioning thermometer, stick it in the soil, and I've seen readings as high as 130, 140 degrees in open sandy soil, say in an open citrus grove. and then go where there's a cover crop, or even just in the shade. And it could be 80 degrees, 75, 80. So soil biology cannot take 130 degrees, and it's not 130 degrees 6 inches deep, but the best, the goodie of the biology is in your topsoil. So it's in that top layer, and the deeper we go, it starts getting a little thinner, because most of the carbon from breaking leaves and whatever is in the top. There's the food. So when that is exposed to the sun, that top layer is just getting cooked.
Yeah.
And they're not gone forever. It really, I mean, it kills them, it hibernates them, but they shut down. They're not doing anything to help the farmer.
Hmm.
So that's temperature is a big deal. And then with if you're mowing it down and just leaving that thatch on top of the ground, or however you're knocking it down, that's keeping soil cool. But it is, temperature is a big deal.
It's kind of like producing your own mulch there when you're just
Right.
dropping it. That's pretty.
Yeah, and we'll get into that. We talk mulches and compost, because with cover crops, we're not bringing in fertility. So it's the cheapest, easiest, in my opinion, best way to get carbon or microbial food, organic matter into a system, because essentially you're taking this one little seed that cost a fraction of a cent, and say it's a sorghum plant. So that sorghum plant can get 8 feet tall and so big around I can't reach around it, and put a root system out, 10 feet in diameter in certain instances, and go down 6 feet. We just made all that carbon from one little seed. And then we'll get into in this podcast about, what these roots are doing, and then what this biomass is doing. But you're not, when you bring in compost or mulch, which we'll talk about in another podcast, that's bringing in some fertilizer with it. So there's minerals in that. So there's pros and cons to both, but just for pure getting microbial food, carbon, building organic matter, the cheapest, best, most efficient way is just plants, living plants. And cover cropping is I work a lot with annual cover crops rather than perennial, because I can get rid of them if I don't like them. They only grow for 1 year. That's what annual means. Perennial is more than, there's biannual and perennial. Perennial is 2 or more than 2. So they live on and on, like Bahia grass. So if you're dealing with annuals and you say you want to make a change, you just don't let it seed that year. You mow it off or herbicide it or whatever you're doing, and you just terminate that one, and you can plant another one. And you can also let them seed and start building a seed bank. A lot of the guys in the perennial systems want them to just keep reseeding, because then you're not buying as much seed. You're getting to reuse a lot of that seed. In a farming row crop system, most of the time they're trying to keep it from seeding, because they're going to put in another crop, and they don't want that cover crop to be an invasive species during their growing season most of the time. So there's a lot of different ways, just depending on what you're trying to, what your farming situation is.
So depending on the soil, is how you figure out like how long you're going to use the cover crop. I mean, is it just usually a season, or is it like a full? Do you sometimes put them on for a full year? I mean, and really let it hydrate or regenerate the soil?
Yeah, and perennial systems for sure. I mean, especially in Florida. I mean, we can photosynthesize with plants 365 days a year. I mean, in Michigan, they can't grow a cover crop, but maybe, and that's usually when their cash crop is in there. So they get just this window, the guys that are starting to understand the benefit of it, and weather is such a factor. There's just so many things, but they get this window of a couple of months where they could plant, a cover crop ahead of there or after, or maybe they're lucky enough to get both. But in Florida, in a perennial system, you just want it all the time. When I was doing my research and experiments and trials on my 5-acre little play farm that I was doing trials with, I was doing just continually. Like I'd spread a variety of cover crop seeds down every other row, every other month. So I was always keeping something seeding. I was always keeping something flowering. I was always keep something. It was just diversity all the time. and irrigation plays a big role. I mean, I started in citrus groves 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, trying to get cover crops implemented into some, and it's just hard because the groves in Florida, and I'm just picking on groves because that's what I spent most of my life doing and growing, and then trying to help these guys. It's on the sandy ridge where it's like ball bearing sand, like beach sand. Oh, if you don't have continual rain, it's almost hard to get something established. So it's tricky. You know, you got to play the rain game when it's hot. In the wintertime, it's not as critical. You get some pretty good stands because it's not as just the cooking heat of the summer or you know, late spring, early fall. So, but yeah, if you're in blueberries or any perennial crop, if you can get 2 planting, a summer and a winter, and get those to produce, and it's doing wonderful things for. It's not that expensive, you know. It's not that costly. Oh, and then you know the bugs. You know, we'll dig into beneficial insects.
So just one last question, Brad. It's more personally to you. So as you are on this journey of your business and before that, just discovery, are you able to come up with some of these different, I guess I'd call them combinations or calculations, whatever you want to say, to come up with solutions for dry years, wet years, different types of sandy soil, different types of areas? Are you developing that kind of knowledge and applying it to your different customers or different projects?
Yeah, just over trial and error. You know, you start to find ones that just do really well. You know, they can take less rain, more rain, heat. A lot of times I'll just, if somebody asks me, I'll just tell them I'll give them a list and just get a real diverse, and then just see what your soil will grow. See what it'll take. It'll also show you where your weak soil is and your healthier soils are. It'll just by how well or bad they do. But yeah, sun hemp typically does really well, and that's a legume. That's a big, tall, yellow flower. It's used a lot in strawberries in their phallus season. Used a lot in Florida. A lot of the daikon radish is typically for the winter, but it'll also grow in the summer, and it seems to do pretty well in soils that are struggling in the beginning. And it is tough. I mean, this isn't an easy thing. When people start going down this road in the commercial farming, it's because they're having problems, and so it's usually a carbon problem or a biological problem. So sometimes you may have to put some compost out with a cover crop seeding, and you may have to do some extra irrigation, or it may only be you can grow it wherever your micro sprinkler's at for a while, you know, until things start changing. So the key is just not to give up. You know, I drew some blanks in the beginning trying to figure it out, how to do this in citrus. So it's just, but once you get it going and it starts rolling, it's like a snowball. It just starts rolling and getting bigger and bigger, and then things just start working.
So let's quickly move into I think the key to all of this, which is kind of this biomass mixing with the living root system, as it's called. Can you explain to us kind of what that means? Because it sure sounds like that's the fundamental, concept here with cover cropping.
Yeah, I mean, when people look at a cover crop planting and we're talking about biomass and soil health, you're looking at what you can see, and that's a whole lot of, if you got a sun hemp and sunflowers and sorghum, I mean, those are big plants, and you're seeing all this biomass. Yes, that is great. That's going back on the soil, organic matter. But that's just the icing on the cake. The true value to me, in my opinion, is what the roots are doing. So you've got, when those roots are terminate, when that plant dies, those roots, that's food for microbes, and it's opening up pore spaces in those voids that were roots that now the microbes have eaten that, and that's, but the best thing from cover crops is what those plant roots are doing while they're alive. So those plant roots are putting out root exudates, which is, a lot of people that start learning this, they just say sugars, or they'll say carbohydrates, sugars and carbohydrates. But it's a list of organic compounds and phytochemicals, hundreds and hundreds of different compounds that any plant is putting into the soil. The rhizosphere is the part of the soil that's right around the root, very, very close. That's the rhizosphere of the plant, or the root, or of the root system. So in that area, got all these compounds that are doing a lot of different things. Some of them are directly the low molecular weight organic acids that they're putting out, or just dissolving. They're hitting calcium phosphate, which is locked up, and it's the acid it's secreting can take that off the colloid and suck it into the root. More than that, it's feeding specific biology that is going out, and it is signaling that whatever biology it's waking up and feeding to go out and fetch whatever nutrient or B vitamin or cytokine or whatever it needs and bring it back to the plant. In turn, makes the plant healthier, and the healthier the plant is, the more root exudates it can put out. So that's the whole symbiotic process between the biology and the plant. So the healthier the plant, the more it can afford to share. And that's kind of when we start getting into fertilizers. I'm not against synthetic fertilizers. I use a lot of synthetic fertilizers. A lot of people get into this world of regenerative agriculture and say you can't do that. Well, we won't go that deep into that on this podcast. But when you are giving a fertilizer that is directly available to the plant, like a nitrogen, and it goes down, that plant almost has to take it up when it touches it. But if it's getting it for free, it's not going to work it's not going to give off some of its currency to have a microbe give it something it doesn't need, because we just gave it to it. So there's a whole lot of variables in that system, but that's the most exciting part about just roots in general, cover crops or your cash crop, is that when it's really healthy, it can give up to 40% of its energy into root exudates to get the nutrition it needs that's in the soil. Some of it's not there. We have to add it. I'm going into some of the fertility things, but Florida is typically very low in potassium. So even if our biology is working relatively well, we sometimes can't get enough potassium to grow a commercial crop. So that's later we'll get into balance and fertility. But if your plant is really, if your crop, cover crop, cash crop is firing on all cylinders, it is putting out food to feed microbes, to have microbes go get fertilizer and feed the plant. That's how it works in nature. That's why plants are green in the woods.
And so I guess what you're saying is, as you add more active roots down underneath that soil, you're just creating more activity, more excitement for everything that's going on, both cover crop plant and cash crop plant, and they just start to work together a whole lot more. Correct? Did I get that right?
And it's hard to study. It's hard to, science is really digging into it now. But so it's like when we do a diverse cover crop, we are waking up all kinds of fungi, bacteria, all these different organisms that are good, healthy organisms. But for our cash crop, yes, they're going to help. But we'll take, for instance, a citrus tree, and we've talked about the citrus trees in the woods. So a citrus tree is a perennial tree, and where it wants to grow naturally is in with other mature old growth trees, oaks, pines, sweet gums, hickories, all the stuff that's that's where they want to grow. When I find them in there, they're perfectly healthy. The fruit is sweet as sugar if you're lucky enough to find a sweet orange and not a sour, but they're very healthy. They're not necessarily putting on a bumper crop. I have seen it because a plant in nature doesn't need to produce 5,000 pounds of oranges to reproduce. And that's all a plant really wants to do, is just enough seed so it can continue to reproduce and go on and on. So as farmers, we can't we can't make a living growing 2 oranges on an orange tree. We've got to grow hundreds of pounds. So there's a push and pull, but that tree wants to live in that forest. And when we take a tree from a nursery and we plant it in a field, that tree doesn't want to grow there. The biology in that field, and it can be 10 feet away. It took centuries or decades to build that biology that's going on in that old growth forest. There's a lot of fungal organisms. That soil's undisturbed. There's mycorrhizal fungi. That one gets over talked a bit, but there's a lot of organisms that you just cannot replicate in that field because it doesn't have the partners. So we just do the best we can with diversity, and then we just do the best we can. And we're doing it. I mean, I see citrus trees, I see all kind of crops. It may not be, because like blueberries, they're a transitional type crop. They like to be on the edge of the woods. So they like to get a little bit of biology from the first order of succession, which is grasses. Then you go to bushes, and you go to trees. And over time, that's how soil evolves by the plants and how they move. So a blueberry, a raspberry, most of the berries, strawberries, in a perfect and ideal world in nature, they're going to grow between the wood line, between the grass and the trees. And that's where most of their biology is what they like. So I went on a little bit of a rant, but that kind of gets you to understand that, there's a lot of bugs in the jugs, and I sell inoculants and biostimulants, and that gives us, it does a task, it does a job, and it does good things, but that's not really, you need the system. You got to try to grow the most diverse soil ecosystem that you can to make the system work.
Yeah.
Did I answer the question?
Absolutely. And then some. And then some. Very good. So how about, you mentioned before, beneficial insects, bees and butterflies and other things like that. Where do they fit into doing cover crops, and do they benefit each other, I guess, is another question.
Yeah, that's the fun part, because that's the part you can see.
Yeah.
You're just out there with them. And I was in a strawberry field the other day with a client of mine, and he had planted, he actually gave a talk on it not long ago at UF, but he had planted Mexican sunflowers around the perimeter of a strawberry field. And so this wasn't even out in the field. And he said it would keep the chili thrips under control out to about 8 rows into the field. And that was just from the beneficial insects that were coming in and keeping those chili thrips in check. So it's hard. It's hard in a conventional system where, it's like the chicken or the egg. We've talked about this before. They're going to have to spray some insecticides until you get to a point. And it's hard to integrate full time. I'm going to say it's impossible, but it's hard to get diverse cover crops or diverse other plants within, a strawberry row that's bedded in plastic. So there's maybe up the country, there's somebody that's growing cover crops and roller crimping a thatch and plant strawberries. Strawberries used to be planted in straw. They used to, pine straw went under them and over them, and that kept down the weeds. It kept them from freezing or helped. It was I think that's how they got their name. I might be misquoting, but yeah, that's but for me, that's where I did a lot of my research on my 5 acres, because it was mostly lemons, limes, a lot of different citrus, peaches, strawberries. I grew all kinds of things. And then I went crazy, full-blown diversity in cover crops. And then I just started watching and testing and checking. And but in any perennial system, whether it's citrus or berry or blueberries, whatever, when you get if you can maintain for a continual amount of time during your season, a variety of diverse cover cropping type plants, I've seen pest populations go down to almost nothing in almost all. On the citrus side, we have thousands of pests and disease that have plagued us for centuries, for my old growing life. And when I was doing all of my cover cropping in counting bugs and looking and learning. Even the beneficial fungus, the beneficial bacteria, all the plants are covered in all this beneficial biology. It's not just in the soil, and there's, the plant is full of it internally too, but it's all over the outside, and that's given so much protection from pathogen, fungals and bacterial problems. So when we just want everything to come, and everything comes, most of the bad guys don't make it. You want to see there's going to be some damage. You're going to see some pests. If there are no pests there, then the good guys have no reason to be there. So I think I wrote in my website years ago that, the money you would save by not having to spray as much, you could afford to lose a fruit or two from rust mite damage or this or that. So, I have seen groves that are perfectly almost 95% pack out in citrus, which is almost even in the conventional world, where the guy did nothing but did his fertility. We're good. Okay. So I don't think I answered the question, but maybe I answered another one.
Well, that was very interesting.
Diversity in bugs is a good thing. I've never seen it. Now, planting one specific cover crop, that could be a different story. I mentioned that earlier in the podcast about the nematode, because some are hosts for a sting nematode or a burrowing nematode. And if you plant just that, yes, you could bring some more up. But there's not enough research done, because it's hard research to do. When you bring in 10 different plant species, now you've woken up all kind of biology, and to study that is very difficult.
I imagine.
Other than going in and counting how many bad nematodes did I have then and how many do I have now, but to really understand the system, it's very, very complex. And you change one little thing, and everything else changes. It's like a spider web. You pull one string on the spider web, and the whole thing moves.
That's interesting. Interesting way to put it.
I think that was there was one fact that I wanted to say. I got from we had him on the podcast, John Lundgren. I listened to him speak 9 years ago at a grass-fed beef conference, and but he said for every single pest, for every single insect that's a problem, there's at least, and the number may have changed by now, he said there's at least 1,700 that are either neutral, beneficial, or necessary. So we have to have insects. If we don't have insects, nothing's growing. We've had people about bees on the podcast, and bees are, everybody's interested in bees. They're cool. They make honey. But, I never put bees. I did have beehives for a time. But once you start having diverse flowering plants, all the native buzzing insects can pretty much do what needs to be done as far as pollination and stuff. I'm not an expert on pollination, but there's enough wild bees out there to do for the most part what needs to be done if you can grow that diverse variety of plants in your cash crop.
Yeah, and they'll find them. They'll find their way in,
Yep.
right? As they go for it. So that's cool.
I have some in my yard. I started a little garden, and I already have a bee's nest in the yard. So
Yep.
yeah, they're coming.
Yeah,
That's great.
No, I played in my. I had some. I don't know how well it's going to work. I just got a small garden now. I don't live on the farm anymore, but I had some leftover summer wildflower blend. It's like 30 or 40 different kinds of wildflowers. So I lightly broadcast that across my little garden area, and then I planted in it. And I don't know how much cleaning and pulling that I'm going to have to do, but the beneficial insects out there right now are just off the charts. So
Yeah,
that's not how you do it in a commercial situation. I'm still doing fun trials and experiments, stuff like that.
yeah, but that's how you have to do it, right? You have so much to cover that you have to have the ability to try a lot of different things.
And it won't get rid of every problem. I probably have mentioned it on this podcast before, but when I did on the citrus side of what I did on my 5-acre farm, the psyllid, which is the one that spreads the the greening. Very few of those. When they would come every 3 weeks and do counts, they just weren't there. He would find. He asked me, "What am I spraying?" And I'm just kind of letting what happens. But the leaf miner, which is a moth that lays an egg on a citrus leaf and it mines through, it leaves a trail and leaf. You'll see them in all kind of crops.
Yeah,
I never had an insect that came in and completely took care of that one. There's the Apopka root weevil, which is a really bad one. It's a big beetle that lays eggs and it eats plant roots. I had spiders that were eating them, but they just couldn't keep up. There were just too many of the bad guys. The good guys couldn't keep up. And then I had one algal problem that raised its ugly head from 3 or 4 decades ago. They had trouble on its back now. And I had some issues with that. Actually, I'll go down a little bit of a rabbit hole. I was at a talk 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and Elaine Ingham was there. I went to hear her speak, and I asked her about that algal spot problem I was having, and she told me to go to the nearest pond and get some beneficial algae from that. And at the time, I was making a lot of compost tea, and she said, take that and put in your tea machine and split and replicate all those protozoa that are in that. And I did that twice and started seeing improvement. It was just shortly after that where I let that place go and went on to another venture. But that was interesting. But those were the 3 that when I mentioned the thousands of insects and problems that plagued the citrus industry, there was only a handful that I ever had to worry about.
Nice. Brad, do you have anything else we want to cover with the cover crops? I think we hit all the topics that you had listed.
I think so. I mean, I think the one I didn't really touch on, I did touch on a little bit, but different cover crops are good at bringing up specific nutrients. So I think rape is one that's really good at bringing up sulfur. So they all have their specific jobs, and I'm not making this up. You can go on the Midwest Cover Crop Council if you want to dig deep into that. All this kind of information is in there. It's really good stuff if you're interested in it. But it's and that's huge. In Florida, sand. If you're growing something, and once whatever that nutrient is, it gets past that last root of whatever that plant is you're growing, it's gone. It's going. It's out of reach. And so these cover crops some of them can get 6, 7, 8 foot deep. I've seen deeper in the Midwest, 10, 12 feet deep. And so that all that nutrition is coming back up, into the top of the plant and going out, knock it down, and it's there to reuse again. So big deal.
Mm-hmm. So Brad, can you give us, as we wrap up here, if there's someone listening that's doesn't do cover cropping, would like to get into it, what would be a good first step for somebody who's a farmer or a gardener or whatever to get into cover cropping? What would be their first thing to do? What do you think?
For the small guys and the gardeners, and this is what I used to do even when I was doing my little research, because even to buy, if I wanted a 20-way blend, which is kind of excessive, I'd buy 50 pounds, or you wouldn't get a good price unless you bought 50 pounds. And I didn't need that much seed. So what a lot of the gardeners, what I tell them to do, and the small growers, is just find your local seed dealer and get a couple of different kinds of their winter or summer wildlife blend. Typically those will have what I talked about, the cereals, the grasses, the legumes. It'll have a mixture. So just get, and they'll sell, some of them will sell them in 5 and 10 pound bags. If you have to buy a 50 pound bag, you can keep that inside. It'll keep in the air conditioning, just keep it sealed up. It'll keep a year or 2, even though the germ date goes out. And then just broadcast that, especially in your fallow season in your garden. If you can intercrop it, if you've got the time to sprinkle it down your middles, and, you got to play with that and see. But getting that diversity in a garden is huge. I do kind of I've done kind of a chaos garden where I would take that seed and I'd blend in a whole bunch of vegetable seed and I just scatter it out. And you can't do that commercially, but that's where you really get the root diversity and the diversity in the top biomass. And then you just got everything growing. You just go out there and you start picking stuff. But that works pretty well. You just mix everything together and spread it out and scratch it in. That's kind of fun. The kids love to do that. They go out and find melons and stuff in the jungle.
It does sound like fun. I'm new to gardening, like I said, and I'm really focused on like one row and make sure I have all my cucumbers together. And, I guess it's not as important as I thought it was.
Yeah, it's probably, yeah. And I think about that all the time. Am I better off if I'm just, I'm not putting them all in a row? And usually I still put them in a row. but the diversity when those, and biology moves laterally. I mean, there's nematodes move really quickly, but beneficial nematodes. Yeah, most nematodes are good. Very few are bad, but that's not what we've learned. But that's a nematode fact. But yeah, diversity is key. We'll get into, and probably the next one or the one after, we'll dig into compost and mulch, and then we can talk more about how to use the two together, where we can cover crop, and where the compost and the mulch should go and how, and the pros and the cons. But live, I said it on the first podcast, the last one we did, in my opinion, the most effective way to build soil and cheapest.
Interesting. Okay, so I think we've about run out of time today for cover crops, but very great, interesting stuff, Brad. Awesome information here. Great place for seasoned veterans and new growers alike. So thank you for that. I look forward to the next piece as we have more of Brad's series on the different aspects of soil biology and health. But for now, thank you for watching.
Be sure to follow us and share and join us again as we grow in the knowledge about the world that feeds us.
Thanks for having me. Y'all take care.
Thank you, Brad. And we'll see you next time with your next exciting topic.
You bet. Can't wait.
Looking forward. Thank you.
Take care.